Good evening, everybody. Want to welcome you to this Urban Renewal Area Workshop and talking about the Caldwell City Center proposed consideration for a new allocation area. And we'd like to get started tonight with Mike Dittenber from the Caldwell Housing Authority, who can kind of give us a little idea of the nexus of the 2014 resolution that was put into place by the Housing Authority and Mayor Nancolis. So Mike, if you could give us a historical perspective of a part of the area that we're looking at tonight, we'd appreciate that very much.
Sure, thank you. My name is Mike Dittenber. I'm the Director of the Housing Authority for the City of Caldwell. And just a little bit of history of the urban renewal consideration. I've had a chance to look at your map, and it substantially mirrors what was put in place many years ago with regard to the North End Neighborhood Revitalization District. And the conversation, or the history, the conversation as I recall it, back in 2011 or 2012 was the former mayor had suggested that the North End may not have seen the vision that the rest of the city of Caldwell had, and that wanted to know whether or not there was anything that could be done in the North End with regards to providing some emphasis on housing. And even though the Housing Authority had an interest in developing down there, we have a few properties that we have developed, and we do think that we were the catalyst for much of what happened down there during the 2014-2015 time period when new housing was developed. But the mayor, and I'm not sure if it was an official appointed meeting, but we met monthly for a couple years. And this committee included Brian Billingsley, who was the P&Z director. It included Sylvia from the police department. It included former police officer Eric Phillips, who was a school resource officer at the time, myself, a couple people from planning and zoning, and the fire marshal. And we basically staffed the North End, and we had an obligation or responsibility to drive through the North End from time to time and ask questions. What about this place? And what about this place? So we staffed it for quite a long time, and then we thought that there needed to be a North End neighborhood revitalization area. So there was a considerable amount of work that was done by city staff at the time. When they created the original boundary, they counted every single building in there. And I think at that time there was around 220 residential units, but only 60 of them were owner occupied, meaning there is a substantial amount of them that were leased. And so when we start talking about how do we improve an area, we see what we can do to increase the owner-occupied residents in that area. Out of that, there was this not a large sum of money. Maybe Raylan knows about it. Mark definitely knows about it. It was some program income that was left over from a pre-CDBG HUD program. And there was a couple $100,000 sitting in this account that the city, were kind of didn't know what to do with. So the Housing Authority used some of that money to do infrastructure improvements in some of the North End areas, bringing water and sewer to some of the places that we were rehabbing. So apart from that, at some point, Mr. Billingsley left city employment, and Jerome Mapp took over, and the North End Neighborhood Revitalization Committee just kind of went away. One of the things that did happen while we were up and running, and we were meeting with different people and different trailer park owners, and there was a lot of people who came out and said the city promised to fix the North End. they promised it, this time, and they promised it here, and this isn't the first time, people are coming through saying we're gonna fix up the north end. And so we feel this is a failed promise. And so I heard all the stories about the lack of streetlights, and that somewhere along the line, people put water boxes in the corner of their lawn where a sidewalk should be for traversing the neighborhood. So we heard a lot of that. And then as things happened, the Housing Authority got busy on other things, and there was a little bit of movement in the north end, and now here we are full circle, some 11 years later, and we're talking about this north end area. For those of you who don't know, and you probably all do, Housing Authority Code is found in Idaho Code Title 50, Section 19, and I always say that's one code section better than Urban Renewal Code, which is found in Section 20. But the first 4 or 5 chapters of the Urban Renewal Code and the Housing Authority Code is pretty much the same. When we identify areas within the jurisdiction where slum and blight exists, where there necessarily exist unsanitary dwelling and housing units, that we can create a housing authority and we can create an urban renewal district. So we kind of thought we went hand in hand in many cases, and now, so here we are.
Could you talk a little bit about, the Housing Authority actually built some homes in that
We
that
did.
area, didn't they?
The Housing Authority, we would take possession of blighted properties that were substantially blighted, and we would raise what was on there, condemn it, demolish it, and then we would build on it. We built 2 houses on Elgin, and they are on 3,000 square foot lots, so they're very small lots. And then we built 3 houses on Denver Street, and of the 3 on Denver, one is a single-family resident, but the other 2 was what we considered at the time kind of forward thinking, and I see now that it's kind of been included in our master plan, but we built age-in-place housing, which meant every single wall was built structurally so a grab bar could be put anywhere in the house. And every single doorway in the house, regardless if it was a bedroom or a bathroom, was a 38-inch door. And rather than having 2 bathrooms and 2 bedrooms, or 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, we had 2 master bedrooms and 2 master baths, so that a person could really age in place with no more than a 1/4-inch access anywhere from the garage into the house and anywhere around. So those are the 2. I think people have, I think there's been a couple of the properties that have had several owners that probably got pretty not rich, but okay off of it. We sold those houses right around the $100,000 price point back in 2015 and 16, and so I would assume they're substantially more than that. But we enjoyed our time there. We looked to do more houses in that area, but CDBG had some specific environmental requirements, and we weren't sure that those environmental requirements could be met with new construction in the north end. So,
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Questions for Mike? Mr. Allgood?
Yeah, around that same time, Mike, well, it's been forever. We had some discussion. Our alleyways were so bad, our trash services and things like that were having difficulty getting up and down the alleyways. Was that part of your discussion, or did that come at a different period?
so that was part of our discussion, and there was a lot to talk about in the north end. I mean, from sidewalks to alleys to what was seen from the front. So we just focused in that year and a half time period that we were up on, what we could deal with from the front, from the, knowing full well that many of the alleys, there was only a 12-foot clearance from one side to the other side. And at the time, we were probably more concerned with what visitors saw as they were coming down the 10th Street exit into town and what was happening as they were driving through Chicago and the north end. That in the alleys was kind of an out of sight, out of mind, but we did talk about it, and there was a real big concern about the alleyways.
Great, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Mr. Jenkins, we'll lean in your direction
Mr.
next.
Chairman, I had a question for Mike.
Oh, I'm
Sorry.
sorry, Dave.
Mike, thanks for coming here today, and I know you've done a lot of work down there, and been a lot of good work down there that I've observed in the last 20, 25 years of looking hard at that place, that side of the tracks there. Let me ask you a question here. What do you think of like a gentrification? What would that do to some of the people down there if a wealthier clientele came in and started picking up things? And I mean, what's the cause and effect to some folks down there?
Yeah, gentrification is a hard issue, especially when you have a housing shortage, and especially when people are willing to turn and sell a house for what would believe to be a benefit to them, and so it's hard to say we want to keep this a starter home or a lower income area. Especially with the housing crisis. With regard to gentrification, I would just like to see in that area, right now Caldwell sits at about 86% owner occupied for its property, and it's one of the largest owner occupied cities in the state. So it would be nice to see that the north end come to 75, 80% owner occupied. And what that will definitely mean is that it will meet that definition of some sort of gentrification where more affluent people are living in that area. I would suspect from a sheer, city interest standpoint, it's hard for me to say this, because I manage the housing authority where we provide housing to, people on the margins.
Mm-hmm.
You'd probably see a better product, a nicer neighborhood.
Which leads me into my second question. So that area, that piece of information that came out in 2014 about that area declaring slum and blight, it seems like there's a lot of rubbish. There's a lot of those alleys. Gosh, I think you can barely get a garbage truck down those alleys, whether it's a recycle truck or it's the garbage truck, without something being hit, something being destroyed and causing more. In that information, what does that do to some of the people that live down there, some of the people that have rental investment properties down there? What do you see? What have you known about that?
One of the benefits of having good pull-through alleys is that you can have alley access parking, and many of the homes could have people park without parking on the street. And maybe you have that in many cases. I haven't driven down any of the alleys in a few weeks, but having a good, healthy, wide alley, and I'm not sure where the right-of-way is in those and how many people have encroached on the right-of-way. I do know in our committee we looked in the trailer parks, the mobile home parks, and we questioned whether or not trailers were allowed to be put in the right-of-way, and there were a number of trailers that were actually allowed to be located in the right-of-way. And so I think there's good examples around healthy alleyways equals healthier housing, and I just don't think we have healthy alleyways in that north end.
So looking at the alley that I live in, it's not paved, and I'm okay with that. It's a little dusty around things, but I don't know how a fire truck can make it down those alleys. Specifically, just talking for myself and mine. Does the fire department go through that? I mean, is there any type of observations or follow-up that's made in some of those alleys? Because they do look like they're shrinking.
Sure. And not that I've ever, like I said, when we had the little group together, we were primarily focused on the mobile home parks that were around here in Caldwell. And so I'm not sure the fire marshal ever drove down the alley, but I would like to see that happen at some point. You know, maybe the fire department gets together and says, let's drive down the alley and let's see what we would do. I mean, I've seen fire departments, you know, knock down a fire. I've seen them set up perimeters. It would be hard for them to protect an adjoining house in an alleyway that they couldn't get down. But I'm not sure, you know, we talk about this being, you know, the land that time forgot. Well, I think we've forgotten about the sidewalks, and we've forgotten about the alleys, and we've forgotten about the overgrown trees, and I think it's just something that needs to be tackled or eaten one bite at a time.
So if we go from the alley to the street, and we go out to the streets, what, in your observation, and I know you're down there, the amount of semis, the amount of commercial rigs that are parked up and down the streets down there, if there is a fire, how accessible are some of those places in your observations? I mean, I don't think I'm too far off by bringing this up, am I?
No, you're not. And the other thing that's, I've been in the housing business for 25 years, and so one of the things that we know is when your neighborhoods start heading the direction you don't want it to head, you start noticing more and more big vehicles, more and more vehicles parked on the street. The invitation of, hey, I can fix your car and 5 other cars, you know, on my street. And when we were looking at properties for future development in the north end, we were concerned about the number of commercial vehicles and noise and certain air contaminations do lend itself to a poor environmental review for development.
So about 10 years ago, I saw some sidewalks going in around some of those trailer areas. And, I mean, that made a lot of sense. So there's been some involvement down there to bring things up, I think, in a better way. And I know you've had a big part of that and a big say-so in that. So I appreciate that, Mike.
Yeah. I think with regards to the sidewalks, and maybe Mr. Hilty can speak to this, I think that was one of the mobile home parks where we were trying to figure out if we could get a fire truck in, and we kind of looked down the street and went, well, there should be a sidewalk right here. And I think the property owner said, listen, okay, I'll put the sidewalks in so we can clearly delineate how we get in and out of the property. So.
Yeah, there are some places that are just about 4 or 5 blocks this way that I don't know how they're inhibited. I don't know how people live in them or heat them. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised there's not more carnage down there with fire and that. But anyway, I appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.
Commissioner Cole.
Mike, sorry for missing the first 2 minutes of your presentation. You may have already covered this or not, I'm not sure, but I wanted to ask the question anyway. Gentrification usually involves moving lower income people out of an area. And has there been any thought as to what would be available for the lower income people that would be moved out of that area?
Yeah, that's there's very few options. We are short rental units for people who meet the affordable definition of needing affordable housing. We were just at the Treasure Valley Economic Summit, I think was the title of it the other day, where Mr. Jenkins spoke at, and they said the demand for housing in the Treasure Valley, and especially in the Canyon County area, is going to increase. And it looks like we might have, 5% growth over the next couple of years. Followed up by a 2 and a 3.5% growth in available units. So,
It's a tough question.
tough question, yeah. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. If you ask me what should I do about affordable housing, if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I'd have an answer for you. Today, it's a hard, we have budget hawks in Washington DC. It looks like there might be more, federal housing cuts. The cost of construction is going up. The costs are just going up, and it's hard. My advice to people now is do whatever you can to stay where you're at. That's the best advice, so.
That meeting that Mike was talking about was last Thursday, and that was an economic summit meeting in Nampa at the Civic Center. They said the population in 2055 could increase per year up to 20%.
Yeah,
And I almost think it could be between 20 and 30%. If you kind of look at the last 5 and look at, what comes up or what goes on around us in neighboring states. So I don't see how, we're not going to have an affordable housing issue ongoing. But I know the people that have lived down here and the people that have go up to the Caldwell Housing Authority and occupy there or apply there to live there, and that's been a big resource and a big asset to this community since I was a kid. So I don't know what Caldwell would do without Caldwell Housing Authority. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Dittenberg? Very good. Thanks, Mike. Stephen?
Chair, Commissioners, good evening. Hard to follow that up. I'll tell you what, these are hard discussions, which I appreciate having. I put together a PowerPoint just real briefly to help walk us through this process as we discuss this topic more thoroughly this evening, and I'll breeze through so I can leave the balance of time for questions. But my goal is to showcase some maps that we've talked about in terms of the size and scope and projects that are included or could be included in a potential plan for the future. And I went through some of my records and historically as we've talked about this topic, and just want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we had discussed and where we're at today. So go through this really quickly. So just a quick timeline of activity. I initially, as far as my records are concerned, I had a PowerPoint presentation that I had produced and presented on August 14, 2023. And then, of course, followed up with another one on February 12, 2024. And then another one on April 8th, 2024, and then May 13th, 2024, and then July 8th, 2024. And I'll speak to each of those dates here shortly, but just want to give you just a brief snapshot of what all the dates consist of. So August 14th, this is a lot of writing, so bear with me, but this project, or what was proposed, was an 80-acre Central Caldwell Urban Renewal District plan. And ultimately, it spanned from 5th Avenue to 10th Avenue, from west to east, and then north from Albany Street to Cleveland Boulevard. So ultimately about 80 acres in there. And I'll showcase a map here shortly to show you a little bit more about what that looked like. As far as the projects that were considered for that potential plan or proposed area that we would cover for a potential urban renewal district, we talked a little bit about a parking garage at that time, downtown incentives. So we discussed what we could do with an incentive package for different businesses. We talked a little bit, Ophelia and I talk a lot about the city of Nampa and their incentives that they have for their corresponding business groups that come in. Sidewalk and pedestrian ramp improvements, as noted by the parking study that was conducted by Kimley Horn, that was provided to the city on July 19th, 2023. So as a follow-up to that, we talked a little bit about what those improvements could consist of based on those sidewalk and infrastructure concerns that they had expressed and Kimley Horn expressed in that study. Streetscape and sidewalk enhancements, synchronized curb extensions, those are bulb outs, and then playground installation project, gateway signage, lighting and security upgrades, and paid parking improvements. Then going into February 12th, we had proposed an expanded boundary and revised the project list that aligned more with the downtown master plan framework. We emphasized wayfinding, beautification, pathways, Indian Creek improvements, parking meters and control measures, bridge improvements, upgrades, road widening and maintenance, and then railroad improvements. And then on 3/13/2024, we covered a broad scope of urban renewal and historic projects. Basically, the scope of the plan was expanded, or the footprint was expanded to about 1440, so 1,440 acres in total. So we looked at a bigger and broader district. And then I talked a little bit about the districts in the area as a whole and the statewide, just to give a little more perspective on what cities had as far as urban renewal districts are concerned. Talked a little bit about Idaho Falls and their 6 districts, and then Meridian, their 5 districts. Boise, they have 6 districts roughly, and this was at the time, of course. And then at the time, there was 105 active urban renewal districts available to research. And then lastly, on 7/8/2024, we discussed a site-specific plan for the Domes Church. You all remember when DevCo was here and presented a little bit about their proposed improvements to that site. We talked a little bit about what it could look like to be a site-specific plan at that location. So in total, we just talked a lot about this area as a whole, Central Caldwell, and considering some elements of the north end as well. So this was the original Central Caldwell area that was discussed. This is actually a little bit more than 80 acres, but roughly it considered an area that focused pretty heavily on the downtown core. You can see it extended north of the tracks. This was in 2023, of course. And it goes south to Everett, I believe, which is where the library is located, right in that area. So covers a good portion of what we call our downtown and our business improvement district. And here's the extension. This one's approximately 1,440 acres, and it covers the downtown. The boundary to the south is Cleveland Boulevard. That second red line to the south is Blaine Street, just to give you a little bit of that orientation. It extended west past 5th Avenue, I think that's 4th, and then north above the I-84. So essentially the boundary is right up against our current North Caldwell Urban Renewal District that was established in 2021. And then to the east there, it goes all the way to Linden Street. So it covers a pretty broad area. Wolffield and Linden right there is the boundary to the east. You can see that this was a much bigger area. In this presentation, I discussed a little bit about the overall area as a whole. There was obviously an extensive list of projects that were considered for this proposed area. But in general, we have a classification through, gosh, I believe it's HUD, but it's an area that basically has a socioeconomic level that is below the average threshold that we have here in the city of Caldwell. So that was one of that was a basis for how this area was contrived. So as a new area is considered, I just threw together a quick list as we can talk about different things that could be incorporated into a future plan. So one thing is beautification efforts as we consider the north end, some of downtown, those elements. In economic development, what we try to preach is private investment spurs, or it helps enhance vitality in the community as a whole. And I'll continue to preach that. But ultimately, our urban renewal district, our previous one, the Caldwell East Urban Renewal District, went from $60 million in total assessed value to $1.4 billion in 2023. And thanks to Raylan for getting me those numbers recently. But ultimately, that shows a dramatic increase in the values over time, and that's the kind of impact we'd like to have. Now, that didn't happen overnight, of course. That happened, gosh, in a very long span of time, right? So in this future plan, as we talk about these things, and Mr. Hilty touched upon this, and I'm sure you will again tonight, but it's not an overnight thing. Urban renewal districts typically take 5, 10, 15 years to get their momentum going. That's evidence in our north area as well. But beautification efforts, sidewalk and streetscape improvements, gateway signage, inclusion of Chicago Street property and its related improvements. And really this is the Lee Jenke property that we looked at for a site-specific plan. And ultimately, if we're going to duplicate our efforts to kind of cover that in a future plan, I think it might be fruitful for us to consider how it might be incorporated as opposed to creating something separate that would be taken out of an overarching plan that would be a larger footprint. So just a thought as we talk about this during this workshop. And then the last thing is playground equipment and park improvements. I know that was harped on in previous discussions about the north area and how we can improve that and make it more of a family-friendly destination for citizens and visitors alike. So Mr. Dittenberg gave a great analysis of Resolution 189-14, and ultimately it was approved in 2014. This is the footprint for it and the boundaries, as you can see, and it lays it out. And I think that this is a logical starting place for us. And speaking with staff, we feel like, man, this is a pretty good, this is a ground level understanding of what needs to be covered. Obviously, there is precedence for it through that resolution, but maybe this could be what we start with and then expand or decrease, or however you all would like to move forward on that. But ultimately tonight, or this evening with this workshop, my goal is just to get more clarity, and I'm seeking obviously discernment as far as what it could look like, and then putting together a proposed project list that would align with whatever footprint ultimately is decided by this commission. And I think that's all I have, but I'm going to leave this image up here and then allow that to frame how we discuss this proposed urban renewal district from there. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Mr. Jenkins? Commissioner Doty?
Just a couple. I didn't see parking. I know you threw some things on that slide, but maybe some parking. I don't know if that falls into the urban renewal by code, but certainly some parking improvements, whether that's for the big trucks, finding a spot for them, or just general parking around this area, especially if we're going to improve it, and then with the new comp plan coming into place, and in particular, maybe a more specific plan for that comp plan. I'm not really following how urban renewal would not be effective for any type of plan that is more specific for that area. If anything, I think it would enhance it, so I'm gonna have to learn more on that. But certainly I'd like to see that some sort of parking within the code, of course, is added to that slide if that's, if the board agrees, so.
Great.
Commissioner Moore?
Stephen, has any part of that, and this is probably a stupid question, but has any part of that ever been included in a URA?
It was. So Chairman, Commissioner Moore, there was a portion of this that was covered in the Caldwell East Urban Renewal District that sunset in December of 2022.
Yeah.
So that one was a pretty big area. I think it was close to 4,000 acres.
Okay. So my next question would be, what's the effect to the businesses that went through that original one? And what's a fair deal, I guess? What's the benefit to everybody to go back through that have already paid into it?
Yeah, I would say, Commissioner Moore, that ultimately, first off, there's a big swath of this area that's residential. So that's one aspect of it. There's some business activity in there, but it's pretty limited. We're talking just Albany or Belmont there is the boundary to the south, and then it runs up against I-84. A lot of that is just a lot of homes and traditional neighborhood type of setup in terms of our zoning classification there. I would say that the benefit ultimately is to, in that former plan, we had gone through an economic downturn, so 2007, 2008. We had a couple other things that stalled us out quite a bit, so we couldn't get, the city couldn't get to everything in terms of improvements and the upgrades that we were hoping to integrate into certain parts of the plan. So that would be, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is just making sure we touch on everything that we set out to establish early on that we just, quite frankly, just couldn't get to. But this is an area that, of course, still has some challenges that we want to correct or get in there and try to improve. And I think with the tool that we have with urban renewal, we can start making those adjustments, even if it's sidewalk infrastructure and frontage and landscaping and those types of things. Little things as we chip away at this over time will make a big difference.
Okay, so if I lived across the freeway there on Ithaca, and I've been down there, and there's a lot of a need, it looks like. I'm not an expert, but just looking at it. What's stopping us from going across there, across the freeway and incorporating that other side into an idea? Just thinking out loud here in this workshop.
Nothing. We can certainly take a look at that. I think this framework was provided just as a starting place for us as far as discussions are concerned. But I would agree. I've seen that area as well and been through there in Hannibal Street and whatnot. And, there's an argument to be made that we can extend this boundary just north.
In your looking at this, do you see any opportunity? Is the domes in there? I'm looking at it here.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
So is there any opportunity in any of that that black area there that's in black, for opportunity for affordable housing. You know, I mean, I know right there where the domes, there's quite a bit of housing right there next to the freeway that seems like it could be used and utilized. That somebody could, is there anything else in there that you can tell us about?
Yeah, there was one on recently that was produced by Autumn Gold. They put in a few cottage homes right next to Advocates Against Family Violence, but there are some redevelopment opportunities that will remain affordable based on whatever, you know, AMI amount they're looking, area median income levels one might be looking for. But there's opportunities like that. So Autumn Gold's done a great job doing that. Greg Arruti and his team have also done a terrific job to make improvements there and to keep their new projects affordable, although they look like market rate products. Of course, the Domes Church is another example of something that is being considered for an affordable housing project. Just to the east there, that's Prospector Point. That's affordable as well. They'll have varying AMI levels applicable for.
Can you point to those, Stephen? Sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt
no
you, but
problem.
can you
I don't know if I have a.
give us just a little bit of direction here so we,
So the Domes Church is just to the far northeast corner of that. You can barely make it out on this map here, but that's where the developer Devco is considering or working on an affordable housing project. Those are always challenging. The margins are so thin that it's just hard to get to in terms of get to the finish line ultimately. But they're still working through that and hopeful that they can get there. And then on Denver, gosh, I think it's south there. It's on 14th and Denver, I believe, is where Autumn Gold is working, or they're finalizing their cottage home project that will be affordable as well. And they're constantly looking in this particular area of town, trying to make those improvements and create opportunities for folks to have home ownership there, which I think is vital for personal net wealth and whatnot. I do see opportunities in this area as a whole just for further improvements and revitalization efforts. There are other projects that we can speak to along Denver to the east that have been examples of that as well.
so the Domes, when they were here, they talked about a specific gap financing. I think it was with Idaho Housing Authority. Is there any way, that we could get them here to present to us and tell us how that would work with some of this area if a developer comes in? I know that he did a pretty good presentation of it, but it's been a while ago. I think this committee should hear that and should know a little bit more about that kind of financing and that opportunity.
Yeah.
It seems like it would maybe take the edge off some of this.
Yeah, it's an arduous process, very long and pretty competitive these days. There's a lot of folks out there trying to receive those tax credits. So yeah, I think it would be helpful to have a developer's point of view and explain exactly what the process entails and walk you all through that so you can understand how urban renewal can fill in the gaps where they can, or if that's something that you want to integrate into the project list.
Okay, so one last time, and I know we're in a workshop here, but just bear with me here. So if I'm a current business and I see Dave Moore walking in here and I'm being proposed to go into another URA, how would I answer that? How would if they said, you're throwing me right back into another URA, how would you answer that? I mean, just because that's probably what's going to be said to me.
Yeah, I would say honestly, so urban renewal districts don't arbitrarily raise taxes. Of course, urban renewal districts, it's a taxing district thing, right? So ultimately, it takes the increment from the values that are increased over time, and then it goes into the urban renewal fund to do these projects. So as a business, you're going to pay the same taxes during that frozen base period. There's really not going to be a true impact from that standpoint, whether there's an urban renewal district or not. If the values increase in the area, you're going to pay the increase in taxes. So I think there's this notion out there that urban renewal naturally does that and increases your taxes as a taxpayer. It really does not do that. So I think there's just a little bit of clarification needed, or just more time to digest or understand it fully. But from my point of view, it's in the research I've done and what I'm aware of, and Raylan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it does not increase your taxes as a taxpayer from that standpoint. That as the values increase, that's the difference. It's not urban renewal doing that per se.
So we make all these improvements and my business becomes worth more money and I'm gonna get taxed more off that increment. Is that right? About right? Yeah, so somebody pays for it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right. But ultimately, if you establish an urban renewal district, does not mean that your taxes are naturally just going to increase. Of course, over time, as improvements are made and those types of things, then that could be a function of development and growth.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Allgood?
Yeah, Stephen, I don't know, maybe you remember, or Counselor Dittenberg, why did this particular boundary stop at Belmont, not go all the way to the railroad?
So Chairman, Commissioner Allgood, I don't have that I don't know the reason why. I would guess that in 2014, as these boundaries were being discussed, my guess is that that was just the target area that they looked at and the group that Mr. Dittenberg explained or shared earlier. But my guess is that they said, hey, let's just focus here. And of course, with CHA's involvement, this is predominantly a residential area. So my guess is that they just focused on that area because of some of the improvements that could be made residentially in that particular side, on that side of town.
Okay.
I don't know if is that pretty accurate, Mr. Dittenberg? Semi-accurate?
This is not really a question, but there was a period of time under the previous administration where there was a plan, and Mr. McDonald may have some information on this. There was a plan to put islands in the middle of 10th Avenue between the freeway and Chicago, and then to widen Chicago and do the same between Chicago and Centennial to make it more of a scenic, wide sidewalks, make that area, open that area up of town. And I don't know where those plans went, but they were in process for a while to make that, instead of a drive-through, make it more of a destination type of situation. And again, I don't know what happened to those plans. They were in place for a while. Maybe Mike remembers, Rob might remember as well.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I thought that was presented to us at URA, and it was declined for payment, and it was pushed back to, I think that's a city street department project, not a URA project. But I think it's a good question considering what we're going in here today. But Mr. McDonald answered that question too, I believe.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to address 10th Avenue. So we have a federal project, for the commission's knowledge, we have a federal project that is scheduled actually for next year to improve 10th Avenue between the interstate and the railroad tracks, the overpass. And that will repave all of 10th Avenue through that section, and it does add raised medians through portions of 10th Avenue. There are still breaks at some of the blocks, but there will be raised median. As for raised median on Chicago, I don't recall any specific discussion on Chicago. And I don't know if that was a project that was before my time proposed or where the status of that would be.
Yeah, the idea was just to open it up where maybe more commercial would be interested and more, and traffic wouldn't use it as a thoroughfare, but more of a stop type of area. But again, that was been quite some time ago. I was just curious what had happened there.
So you were saying remove it? Remove that center, those center pieces on Centennial Way.
No, not Centennial, Chicago, between Centennial and.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Can I add one thing about the boundary?
Sure, please. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me come back up and answer the question that Commissioner Moore had about the boundary, and whoever asked the question about how come it doesn't go to Albany and how come we chose that. When we went into this and looked at this area, we chatted with a number of residents, and we believed this was a community. This was a community. That parents were letting their kids walk to McDonald's and walk to the school, and kids were that was kind of their reach of their community. So we didn't think that this area that we proposed here was that this community would let their kids, or they were going to the other side of the freeway. The people who lived there were just primarily confined to that side. And we stopped short of the railroad tracks in large part because of the lack of residential units there. So we were, because it was the neighborhood group, and not a broader, urban renewal group, we tried to focus on the neighborhood. And I think if you see there, we kind of carved out a couple of buildings because, they were more commercial and industrial than they were anything else. So we just kind of left them out to try to encompass those that were primarily residential areas.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question for Mike.
Mr. Moore?
Mike, so if you try to cross over to, when I was a kid, you could go across the freeway there and there was a light stop and you could go over to Luby and play basketball and they had lights there in the evening. And that was a very dangerous, treacherous part of the freeway. There was always an accident there. There was always something happening, especially in the summer when it was hot. So today, if you take your bike and you try to cross and try to go to that side of the freeway there, you've got to go down to 10th and you kind of take your chances there crossing. Or you go over to Centennial Way and you cross. And you kind of take your chances there too, crossing. It's very dangerous.
Commissioner Moore, that is correct. And even if you went over to Centennial Way, the bike path that connects to the other side of that green belt is still on the other side of Centennial Way.
Correct.
So,
It's a long walk.
right. And this is just kind of an isolated area. When we talk about, future development and, PUDs, planned unit developments and stuff, we really look about what can we put in an area that services the neighborhood and services the community. We thought with a traditionally zoned neighborhood, like it was, that there was plenty of opportunities for bodegas, shops, and that sort of stuff, that this area here could service itself and could be its own little community. So,
Is the overpass over the freeway there that's got the walkway, the gated walkway, the chain walkway, where my daughter had her senior pictures with a basketball, is that going to be going away?
that would be a question for Mr. McDonald.
No, they're improving.
Because I heard it was going away from a city employee.
Recently?
Yeah, within the last 90 days.
No, it stays, and they're doing renovations to improve the aesthetics.
Yeah. Gosh, I think that's a great example for coming over the railroad tracks, something like that, like they have over on Overland. I think that'd be a big corridor for people that are walking from that side of the railroad tracks over to downtown. Just thinking out loud here because it's a workshop. But anyway, I appreciate that observation.
Stephen, I have a question for you. When we look at an area like this and listening to what you've had to say about the boundaries, I look at this from both the economic impact and the neighborhood impact. They're not at odds, but they each have their own specific goal.
Right.
I'd like to see the neighborhood aesthetic improve and quality of life and all of that, but I also want to see the businesses thrive. Is there a way to put together a plan that both get an equal bite of the apple when it comes to projects and improvements, offering incentives and offering sidewalks?
Yeah.
Can that be done?
Yeah, Chairman, that's great comment, and I agree with you fully. It takes, in some cases, public investment to spur private investment. And this is an area that is, you look at it and people might question, why urban renewal? Why do you need urban renewal here? What's the point of doing that? The city's growing as a whole. Well, you can look at it and see that people call it the land that time forgot. Of course, that's an overused phrase, but a lot of it's true in many ways, because if you don't have a tool to help enhance the area, then it will likely remain this way, or with very little improvements over the years, if any. So my goal in this is to create a little more continuity in our central area of the city. You come downtown and whatnot, and I've heard this before from others, but people will say, well, you can walk a few blocks outside of Indian Creek Plaza and realize that there's a real disconnect there. And I don't want that to be the case. I feel like Caldwell as a whole we need to look at how we can improve our core as a whole, right? Like as it relates to this area, which is to me very central to our community. So those efforts are needed desperately. So how do we get there? How do we do that? I think a district like this could create that momentum. And I do think encouraging business to come into this area is vital as well, as our downtown only has we don't have a huge footprint for downtown. And a lot of this area is still contiguous with the downtown core. So as we look at the future of downtown and expanding opportunities for business to start migrating this direction, those are the things that I look at, because 20 years from now, a lot of this area is going to get absorbed into downtown as we look at the future layout for how downtown Caldwell is going to be framed. So I think a lot of those things, Chairman, are one and the same as far as economic development and residential development for this area and how they connect. There's a lot of crossover, and truthfully, the downtown core is just going to grow and expand in this direction and in east and west as well. So those are things I think about as it pertains to this opportunity.
Thank you, Stephen. Commissioner Moore?
So to piggyback what was just said, that question. So a plan where, Roger Brooks came in, I went to all those meetings when he first came in and that. How important do you think it is? What's the relevancy of doing that first and seeing where we're at and then approaching something like this? What are your thoughts on that?
I think having an urban renewal plan prior to having someone like a Roger Brooks or someone else come in, to me, does it need to happen or not, right? And if it needs to happen, then I don't see a reason to delay it. That's just my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. I think as we look at this, if there has been very little change, if any change over the years, I don't see a reason why we sit here on our hands and wait for 10 more years to pass and then we get comfortable. People always say, like, gosh, when's the best time to plant a tree, right? You've heard that old adage. But also just buying a house, like you try to time the housing market, and inevitably you'll never be able to do that well, right? It's just a matter of economics, and it's really hard to predict. I think if you have the framework in place and then somebody comes in with a plan that makes a lot of sense for the community to move in that direction, now you have a tool to execute on that plan. Now you have a funding mechanism per se. So to me, it's an advantage to get something going early prior to even someone coming out, because then you have the framework established.
Thank you, Stephen. Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I ask Councilman Dittmer the same question?
Just real quick, let's give Commissioner Warwick a chance to
Thank you. I would invite you guys, Autumn Gold is a really good example of some of the things that have happened down there. If you haven't driven down Freeport Street, some of you, if you go north on 10th and then east on Freeport, you'll go down there and you'll see on your right, there's 3 homes that were on what were actually before 2 lots. And they fit those homes on there. They're very small lot sizes. They're almost like those shotgun style homes. They're really thin. But that's such a good use of that land there. And Autumn Gold made those affordable. They came to Urban Renewal, and Urban Renewal paid for some of the infrastructure to allow them to make those affordable. There's a huge demand for those homes when they came available. And I think there may be 1 or 2 on Elgin too. I don't remember. Are there, Steve?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I go past the ones on Freeport every day, so I remember those. But those are really good examples of what you can put down there, and you can get more homes in there and better quality of homes than we've got down there now. Some of those things, you've got the trailer park that's in the, upper right section of this that just needs to go away, because that's just a scary place to be. And I think that's actually where they put those sidewalks. Because I've delivered meals in there, and it's very confusing to figure out how to even get in there amongst those trailers, because they're just set haphazardly in there, and then you've got another trailer park that we also deliver meals to, that's here off between 13th and 14th, just east of Elgin Street, that is just, it's horrible, the conditions that those people are living in, and if we could get those portions of land and get someone interested in building there with a little bit of support from Urban Renewal, you're going to take people out of living in conditions that no one should be living in and get them living in something that's safe and sanitary. Mm-hmm. And I'm all for Urban Renewal supporting that in this area of town, and this is a really good boundary right here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Mr. Moore, you had a question for Mr. Dittenberg?
Yep, Mr. Dibmer, thanks for coming up again, getting your exercise in today. I know you. So that same question that I asked Stephen Jenkins, how do you feel about that?
Mr. Moore, my answer to that is I have a tremendous amount of respect in the local process and the local people who were put in place to make decisions. And I also have great faith in our city staff that kind of provides the economic data for this area. Whether or not it's this area or another area, Mr. Jenkins is correct. If there's a need, I think some movement there should be some movement to address that need sooner rather than later. And whether or not this should be extended, a block to the east or, a block to the south or across the freeway, we can debate that for a long time. And, but this is a good boundary, and if you were to say, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down today, of course, the decision is yours, but I would give the commission a thumbs up today to move something.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think it's only fair to ask Mr. McDonald if he'd come up and answer that question. I'd like to hear his side of it.
Would you like your attorney present?
Can you repeat the question? This was regarding whether it's better to start an urban renewal area now or wait till we meet with a Roger Brooks type person.
Correct.
My opinion is, I think similar to Mr. Jenkins, if we feel like we need an area, I don't know why we would wait. The only benefit I can see to waiting for Roger Brooks is he may propose things that we would want to put in our plan that we may not be thinking about, and that would be the only benefit, I think. But aside from that, we have a pretty good idea of many of the things that we need out in that area, and I think that we could put a plan together that would be very beneficial now without any outside help really from a consultant like Roger Brooks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that last part of what he said. I think that it does need to be paused and it needs to be looked at. I think to get a full picture and a full idea of what needs to go on down there, I think he'd be a good one to give us an idea. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hilty.
Thank you. I'm just going to use the last minute to talk process, and I think Commissioner Moore, you touched on it. We presented last week this stepped process in forming a new urban renewal area. The step one is the idea phase, and we're still there. And so I know we got little time left, but maybe, Mr. Chairman, for you, staff is going to need to know kind of how to proceed on this to keep it moving. And the first thing that we're going to need is a footprint. We're going to have to decide where you would want the boundaries to be located. Stephen started with this one, and I thought it was a good idea because it includes, generally, it includes that neighborhood that Mr. Orozco was speaking to primarily at his presentation last month. But it doesn't have to look like that. It could be larger. You could cut it down. But that'll kind of be that decision needs to be made, and staff's going to need some instruction on that to get into the more detailed work that needs to be done. And to go to City Council with the necessary resolution on deteriorating area. The other thing would be the project scope. Stephen presented a few things to you tonight in his PowerPoint. I did jot down Commissioner Doty, parking improvements potentially would be included there. And Commissioner Moore, I don't know if this was what you intended, but I jotted down a pedestrian bridge. We could look into that for crossing I-84 if it's going to, especially if these neighborhoods that do have some similar characteristics, both north and south of I-84 might be included in the same area. That's probably something we'd want to look at too. But anyway, I know we're out of time. My point is this, it might be wise to have a discussion about how to continue this and move it past this idea stage.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hilty. We're going to need to run into the next meeting. Does anybody need a break before we end this workshop and move into our regular business? All right. We're going to give the clerk a couple of minutes.